Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Autists, Women on the Spectrum, by Clara Törnvall. Translated by Alice E. Olson. Narrated by Bretton. Introduction. There ought, I thought, to be a ritual for being born twice, patched, retreaded, and approved for the road. Sylvia Plath. The Bell Jar. "Let's go to page 7, says the psychologist. I browse among the pages on my lap. There it is, at the bottom. Autism, without accompanying intellectual impairment and without accompanying language impairment, level 1. There's nothing else interfering, the psychologist says kindly. No suspicions about other diagnoses. I read that I fulfill all 7 diagnostic criteria for what used to be known as Asperger's syndrome. By a long shot, it seems. On one of the rating scales, where a score of more than 77 points supports a diagnosis, I come in at 154. I feel like I've done well by being such a clear-cut case. The assessment, which we are going through together, also includes a summary of my psychiatric history. It's aimed at others within the psychiatric services whom I may come into contact with in the future, the psychologist explains. That won't happen, I think to myself. I will never again be in contact with the psychiatric services. This is it. My past unfolds. It's like watching a film with an unexpected twist at the end. A revelation that overturns everything I thought I knew about the main characters and the plot. The hints foreshadowing the solution to the mystery suddenly appear in stark focus. They line up, one after another, throughout the years. The signs have been there all along. I have always known that I'm autistic, and yet I haven't had a clue. 3 months earlier, I walk through downtown Hagsätra, a suburb south of Stockholm. I step in under a roof, passing the supermarket and the pastry shop, my mind churning with the same 3 words. This is it. It happens sometimes. A sentence gets stuck in my head, a short loop repeating itself like an incantation. The neuropsychiatric clinic is hard to find, despite the GPS in my phone. I spin a lap in the wrong direction through the downtown area and come to a stop, disoriented, in front of a statue titled Girl with a Ball. The girl is leaning forward, frozen, with her mouth shaped into an O. The fountain in front of her has been drained of water. The stream she blows is invisible. I'm 42 years old, and so tired of myself that I have just about had it. As far back as I can remember, I have suffered from anxiety, a sinkhole in the pit of my stomach that I'm so used to it has become my ground state. The anxiety has nothing to do with my thoughts. It lives in me like an organism of its own. I'm not compulsive or hypochondriacal, not plagued by worry. I don't meditate on future disaster scenarios. But as I move through the world, I'm always uncertain. Every step I take is tentative, as though I'm walking on thin ice. I'm constantly on edge and weighed down by a sorrow I don't understand. I sleep with my fists clenched at night. For periods, I have violent nightmares. In a recurring one, I have died as a little girl. Darkness has settled over the Hummelgarden Park in Stockholm, and I'm crouched down, shoveling black earth out of my grave with my bare hands. It's night time, and I'm all alone in the park. The hole in the ground grows. Down in the dirt, I glimpse a green nightgown with white flowers, a lock of blonde hair, the handlebar of my doll's pram from Brio. I'm alive and grown up, yet the girl's body lies buried in the dirt. What's happened to me? Why did I die? For as long as I can remember, I have felt different. I count backwards. Since the age of 18, I have seen 6 different therapists for individual therapy and 3 couples or family therapists. been on 2 different kinds of antidepressants and various anxiety meds, read piles of books and articles about mental illness, and spent a weekend at the psych ward. Nothing has helped. None of what is said or written fits. It's never describing me. Slowly a thought has matured in me. It can't be possible that I'm supposed to feel this way. Therapy and medications are supposed to work, aren't they? People go to therapy for a limited period, not their whole lives. I'm not young anymore. I have to finish this. I try another route to find the clinic, giving way to a large man in a denim vest who is yelling out for change, hurrying my steps without knowing if I'm walking in the right direction. The downtown area seems fluid, as though the streets have shifted every time I turn my eyes in a new direction. Over the years, I have tried to identify with the most common mental struggles affecting women. I have wondered whether I'm guilt or shame-driven, self-effacingly preoccupied with pleasing others, a high-achieving good girl racing towards burnout, a perfectionist with an eating disorder who hates her body, or simply chronically depressed. No, it's not right. None of it. On the contrary, most of the time, I don't care what others think of me. I achieve, but only in areas that interest me. Anything that bores me, I ignore. When it comes to my body, I'm indifferent. In conversations with friends, I sometimes try to pretend to care about sugar and exercise, things that women are expected to be interested in. But in truth, I eat anything I want. I have never perceived my self-worth to be tied to my body. And yet this relentless anxiety and debilitating fatigue. Do I have trouble sleeping? Not at all. I'm out like a light every evening. There has to be a reason. Finally, I find the entrance to the neuropsychiatric clinic for adults. The psychologist I'm seeing has a name that I interpret as feminine. I imagine a wise older woman, close to retirement, with reading glasses on a cord around her neck. The kind who stands firmly rooted in her long experience, who has seen it all and doesn't fear anything. The people in the waiting room look normal. White earphones, sneakers, a man in a light blue sports jacket is absorbed in his phone. On the tables are mandala books for colouring. I open one. It's not a chemical imbalance, it's an imbalance of power. A previous visitor has scribbled on the title page. Neither, it's a dysfunction, a different handwriting replies. But it's still a part of you, so be proud, a third one points out. A woman steps up to the front desk to pay for her visit. Receipt, says the guy behind the glass. The woman looks at him in confusion. Do you mean if I need it? She asks. A tiny bubble of joy rises inside me. She and I are related. How are you supposed to know what someone means when all he says is, receipt? It sounds like a statement, not a question. I have come to the right place. These are my people. Clara? My psychologist walks up, holding out his hand. He is a small man in hipster clothing. He is younger than me and quite good-looking. Damn it. Behind his back in the corridor on the way to the consultation room, I feel like a mental case. A particularly difficult one that should be locked up right away. He explains matter-of-factly how the assessment will proceed. He will interview me and speak to my close family. We will do tests and I will fill out questionnaires. I say that I'm worried about not being believed. The friends with whom I have shared my suspicions about autism have all replied, "Not you." I know how to behave. I'm a grown woman and I've practiced all my life. I'm really good at keeping up a front, I warn. He chuckles. There's no point in putting up a front here. Afterwards, I Google him. He runs a podcast about geek culture. I have been waiting for over a year to start the assessment, and it wasn't until I called up the Patient Advisory Committee that it became my turn. I want to be evaluated within the public healthcare system, not through a private clinic. The risk that I will wonder afterwards if I have bought my diagnosis must be eliminated. This shall be done right. I want to speak truthfully and honestly, so ahead of the next meeting with the psychologist, I draw up a list of my difficulties, lest I forget something. I'm the kind of person who puts too much faith in words. I don't pick up on subtext. I don't realize that people might be lying. When I speak, my words fall to the floor and lie there. I feel an enormous sense of powerlessness at not being able to make myself understood. I'm often angry with others because they don't understand what I mean. I keep in touch with more people than I have the energy for. I like to talk about the same thing for a long time and don't like conversations that jump too quickly between topics. I struggle with eye contact. I have a hard time working with others because no one thinks like me. I become impatient with other people's slowness. I don't like repeating myself. I have already said what I wanted to say once. That should be enough. In social situations, I mimic and put on an act. I'm scared of people. I can't handle abruptly switching between roles, such as my parenting and professional roles, being torn between worlds. I can't find a balance between the children's needs and my own. I run myself into the ground. I can't handle being interrupted. For example, speaking on the phone with someone who wants something other than what I'm thinking in the moment. I don't like changing plans. I get tired quickly and need a lot of breaks. I have a few strong interests, but I'm uninterested in much. I constantly feel like I'm not being left alone. I'm sensitive to sound. I wear sunglasses and earphones at all times. I'm intelligent in certain clearly defined areas, such as linguistically and theoretically, yet completely incapable in others. I can't do simple maths or follow basic instructions concerning anything practical. I struggle with routines, such as showering and brushing my teeth. I do it, but there is a resistance. Anything practical or physical requires a great deal of effort. I have a poor sense of direction, to the extreme. I get lost in the corridors at work, where I walk every day. I'm all but face blind, unable to recognize people, but I remember everyone's name. I have a hard time with chit-chat, don't know what to say. I want to speak, but I'm tongue-tied. The gap between outer reality and my inner world is too wide. The two don't connect. Reading through the list, I want to laugh. Who is this mad woman? The Autists. It's like being in a transparent box. No one can hear you. They can see you, but they can't interact with you. You can bang on the wall, but you can't get out of it. So it's very lonely being in the box your entire life. Olivia, participant on the reality show, Love on the Spectrum. A brain is born. 3 weeks after conception, when the embryo is smaller than a millimetre, a groove forms in the future fetus. The groove is covered over and becomes a tube, one end of which expands into a bubble. This little bubble is the beginning of the brain. When a child with autism is born, somewhere along the way, the brain has developed differently. The cause of autism is biological, and there is a strong hereditary component. It's a tricky field of research involving many different genes. Children can inherit a genetic vulnerability to developing autism. But for autism to arise requires a certain amount of genetic differences. So the specific combination of genes is crucial. This also means that not all siblings in the same family necessarily become autistic. Sometimes, such genetic vulnerability doesn't exist in the parents, but arises spontaneously in their sex cells or during the fetal stage, though this is less common. Such genetic mutations can, for example, be caused by the immune system overreacting to a viral infection, by stress or trauma in the mother during pregnancy, by brain injury at birth, by the parent's age, or by the child being born extremely prematurely. What's certain is that no one becomes autistic from vaccinations or the environment they grow up in. A different brain leads to a different way of being and functioning. Autism is not a disease, it can't be trained away, and there is no medication. Today, so-called high-functioning autists are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder without intellectual impairment. What used to be known as Asperger's syndrome has, since 2013, been incorporated into the term autism spectrum disorder in the Psychiatric Diagnostic Manual DSM-5. The designation Asperger's is on its way out, but it's still used occasionally. The term spectrum disorder reveals that many ways of being and functioning in the world fall under the same umbrella. The autism spectrum is wide and includes people who experience great difficulties and may, for example, be non-speaking, as well as individuals with demanding full-time jobs. The degree of autism is differentiated into 3 levels, indicating how much support the individual needs, where 1 is the lowest. Autism is relatively new as a term and a diagnosis, but not as an experience. As a condition, it has always been present in humanity. But throughout history, the language used to describe autistic people has varied. They have sometimes been referred to as withdrawn, eccentric, or odd. Autism cuts across categories such as age, class, gender, and ethnicity. It exists all over the world and expresses itself in similar ways across different cultures. Autism makes itself known early, even in the first or second year of life, and children with autism grow up to become autistic adults. Despite this, almost all public discussion of neuropsychiatric diagnoses revolves around children and young people. It's as though we think people grow out of it. They don't. Another, even stronger misconception about autism is that it's a distinctly male condition. The image of the typical autist as a man has long been prevalent in both research and culture. High-functioning autism, or Asperger's syndrome, was seen as a diagnosis for boys. For a long time, girls of average or above-average intelligence weren't even thought to be able to have autism. Such girls were said not to exist. There are certain widely established conceptions around men with autism, yet the autistic woman remains unknown in our time. In fiction, films, TV shows, and books, the gifted and socially awkward woman is portrayed as a copy of the male geek with identical glasses and the same interests. A neurodivergent woman who can write a doctoral thesis in theoretical philosophy but has to stop and think when slicing a loaf of bread, who collects teacups and has to recuperate for a day after seeing friends, who loves animals but avoids eye contact, is a rare figure in the public consciousness. This book is about her, about women with high-functioning autism. The term high-functioning is controversial. Its opposite would be low-functioning. If I had an intellectual impairment, I wouldn't want to be designated as low-functioning. Being classed as high-functioning doesn't make you a savant, with the ability to memorize never-ending series of playing cards like Dustin Hoffman's character in the film Rain Man. It simply means that you are of average or above-average intelligence, and that you can hold down a job and maintain a relatively well-functioning life. At the same time, these categories are needed to account for the many different faces of autism. The research quickly gets thorny if we use the same broad concept, autism, to designate varying degrees of difficulty. The term high-functioning may also contribute to removing the stigma around autism and counteracting the prejudice that all autists have an intellectual impairment, because that is not the case. Between 1 and 1.5% of the world's population are autists. Roughly 75% of them are of so-called normal or high intelligence. More than 100,000 Swedes have autism. More than 5 million Americans have autism. In order to be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, a person has to fulfill 7 criteria. These often include deficits in social communication and interaction, for example, in adapting one's behavior to different settings. The individual must also display a limited range of behaviors and interests, perhaps relying heavily on routines, struggling with change, having strong special interests, and being hyper or hyposensitive to sensory input. These symptoms must have existed since early childhood and negatively affect their day-to-day life. The diagnostic criteria are generally formulated in terms of deficits, yet autism is simply a different way of functioning. While autism itself is a condition with biological causes, the idea of autism is a social construct. If the norm hadn't been based on the brains of the majority, autism as a label wouldn't exist. Autism challenges established dichotomies such as presence and absence, silence and speech, normal and abnormal, obstacle and asset. Mentalization, the ability to perceive one's own and others' thoughts and feelings, functions differently in autists. For an autist, reading and interpreting body language and facial expressions require active thought processes. What others do automatically, the autist must do intellectually. This can make it harder to draw conclusions about other people's intentions. But a person who interprets communication literally and fails to recognize hidden meanings also tends to be honest, with a strong sense of justice. People with autism receive and process information differently. Autists find it easier to see and focus on details than totalities. People who aren't autists often do the opposite. They take in the big picture, but might miss the details. Being an autist also means struggling with goal-oriented behavior. Starting and finishing things can be difficult, and autists like to use the same strategies or do the same thing in different situations. Neurotypical individuals, more specifically those who do not have autism, can flexibly switch strategy based on the demands of a new situation. Their day-to-day activities, such as cooking or toothbrushing, often happen by routine and don't require much thinking or energy. Autists often have a so-called uneven cognitive profile. An autist can be very competent in one area while experiencing great difficulties in another. In many situations, focusing on details, having special interests, and being stubborn can be strengths. The hardest part is usually all the other stuff: social interaction, relationships, and everyday life. Autistic traits can be found in about 1 out of 5 people. But to be diagnosed with autism, a person has to fulfill all 7 criteria. In common parlance, you might sometimes hear the comment, "Everyone is a little autistic." But that's a misconception. If you are an introverted person who doesn't meet the remaining criteria, you are not autistic, simply withdrawn. Back in Hague, I'm sitting across from the psychologist in the consultation room at the clinic. It's our second session. It's late in the summer, and the sun casts shadows on the pine table between us. Through the open window comes the sound of a jackhammer drilling into the asphalt on the other side of the motorway. The diagnostic assessment is about to begin. The psychologist takes out a bundle of self-report inventories. They are a little antiquated in their view of autism, he says apologetically, but can still offer a good indication. The point of the questionnaires is to evaluate the degree to which various statements apply to me. I'm supposed to fill them out before our next visit. The psychologist is aware that the examples in the questions are based on men. On the children's forms, they have now added questions to better target girls, but these are still missing on the adult version. He says that we can go through my answers when I'm ready, in case I find anything to be unclear. At home, I jot down angry notes in the margins. Do I like playing board games? No, not in particular, but but I realise it's probably expected of me as an autist. I usually notice number plates on cars. No, definitely not. I'm not the least bit interested in cars. Male-oriented, I note in the margin. I'm fascinated by numbers. No, I don't particularly enjoy reading fiction. Yes, I do, actually. Do I like gathering information about different categories of things, such as car makes and different kinds of trains? No. Why this never-ending fixation on vehicles? Do I enjoy social gatherings and meeting new people? I realise I'm expected to be leaning towards a no, but I usually find that stuff pretty exciting. Sure, it does sap my energy enormously. I often get into misunderstandings with others, and I have to rest for a long time afterwards. But I have never been a complete loner. I've always had friends. I envision the person whom the questionnaire is aimed at. An anemic male gamer who rarely leaves his apartment, collects soda cans, can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute, and monotonously drones on and on about the Cretaceous period. I think about the characters in TV shows like The Big Bang Theory and Atypical and other male geeks in popular culture. The self-report inventory assesses me based on how masculine I am. The Invisibles. I feel invisible and exposed at the same time. Do you feel that way too? At DaisyCake65 on Instagram. The sculpture stands hidden between two tall oaks. It depicts a huddled child without a face. The child is crouching with its arms close to its chest. Inside the grove of trees in the park in Vidkar, Gothenburg, the autumn leaves are stained with rust and the rain drizzles quietly. A naked branch reaches out above the child's head, which is turned upwards, as though looking at something in front of it. The child is at the mercy of an invisible, all-powerful figure. As I tower before little Alone, I am transformed. This was once the location of one of Sweden's biggest children's homes. Vidkar Orphanage was inaugurated in 1935, with room for 200 children from the age of 1 to 16. These children's homes are a stain on the national conscience. When Margareta Rindahl's Alone was unveiled in 1988, 10 years after the orphanage shut its doors, the sculpture was accompanied by a plaque reading, "In 1935 to 1976, many children were met with love and care at Vidkar Orphanage and were given a good start in life. The grown children objected. They spoke of physical abuse, neglect, violations, forced feeding, and sexual abuse. One doctor and 2 headmistresses were identified as particularly culpable. The plaque was removed. Over the years, thousands of Swedish children lived at Vidkar, and many were subjected to a suffering as systematic as it was meaningless. In a recurring punishment, children were locked up and isolated for up to a week, or forced to shower in ice-cold water. The buildings were surrounded by a 6-foot fence with barbed wire. These children had been placed at the orphanage by the Child Welfare Board in Gothenburg. Today, all the buildings are gone, except one. But the grown children haven't forgotten. Alone has been decorated as though the sculpture were a grave. On the ground, among the wet leaves, someone has left a hand-painted pink heart with the words, "What's the meaning of life if you are forced into a destructive, crushing loneliness?" The buildings in the area house preschools, care homes, and psychiatric services for children and adolescents. From Alone, I walk along the trail through the park grove. On the chain-link fence outside the preschool, the children's rubber boots have been hung in a line. There are no children in the playground. Inside, the lights are off. From the corner of my eye, I see a wooden face appear to my right. It's an overturned log that, like a giant, has fallen headfirst and been left lying under a young maple. On the tree's giant back, 3 words have been carved in Latin. Contra spem spero. Against all hope, I hope, said the artist Hieronymus Bosch. Is it a vain hope?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?